subject. We have finished with the blood supply of the head and neck and the teeth. Today we'll start with our subject of the brain. Now the brain, as you know, is part of the central nervous system. The major part of central nervous system is situated within the cranial cavity, and it's covered with 3 layers of meninges: the dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater. And the brain is the organ which controls all the activities of the body. Anatomically, the brain is divided into 3 parts. This slide shows the inferior surface of the brain. We have removed it from the cranial cavity, and we are looking to the inferior surface of the brain. So this rests on the floors of the cranial fossa. The brain is divided into 3 parts. The largest of these is the forebrain. All these parts are the forebrain. And then is formed of another part which is very small, which is here, this only dotted portions. This is called the midbrain or mesencephalon. Then the rest below here, these 3 portions, this part is called the hindbrain. So we have 3 parts: forebrain, which is the major part of the brain. The forebrain, again, is called prosencephalon. Pro, it means first, or at the beginning. So it's forebrain, formed of telencephalon. Telencephalon is the 2 cerebral hemispheres. These 2, they form the largest parts of the brain. They form about 80% of the total size and weight of the brain. Then the other part of it, between the 2 cerebral hemispheres, is the diencephalon. And the diencephalon, again, is formed of 4 parts: thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, and subthalamus. The midbrain is the smallest part of it, and this is called mesencephalon. Mesen, it means mutawassit, mid, in the middle. This is the smallest part, lies between forebrain and the hindbrain. The 3rd part is the hindbrain or rhombencephalon. It's formed of 3 parts. This one also is formed of medulla oblongata, pons, and cerebellum. Cerebellum المخيخ, وpons هو الجسر, and medulla oblongata is the last part, which joins through the foramen magnum to become the spinal cord. 2 parts of the rhombencephalon, that is the medulla oblongata and pons, together with the midbrain. These we call them brainstem. Saqal brain, brainstem. The brain on each side gives rise to 12 cranial nerves. Now again, in this slide, the forebrain, all this is the forebrain or the prosencephalon. The forebrain, as I said, is formed of 2 cerebral hemispheres. This is one. This is the other one. This is the fissure between the 2 cerebral hemispheres. And between them is the diencephalon. This is the portion of diencephalon which is seen. It's called the hypothalamus, the lower part of the diencephalon. The other parts are hidden between the 2 cerebral hemispheres. So these, they form the forebrain or the prosencephalon. Then this small part, which contains this minute opening and this nerve arising from it, this small portion is the midbrain or the mesencephalon. The rest which remains is the rhombencephalon or the hindbrain, formed of 3 parts. This is the pons, and here is the medulla oblongata, and these 2, and this is the cerebellum. Cerebellum, medulla oblongata, pons. Now the midbrain, this portion, small portion, together with the pons and medulla oblongata, which continues as spinal cord in the foramen magnum, These three parts, we call them brain stem. We call them brain stem. Now the brain on each side gives rise to 12 cranial nerves, 12 pairs of cranial nerves. These are given Latin numbers. Latin numbers first, this is the olfactory nerve. Then you have the second, this is the optic nerve. You have the third, this is the oculomotor nerve. This is the fourth, is the trochlear nerve. This is the fifth. The fifth is called the trigeminal nerve. Here you have the sixth, which is the abducen nerve. Then you have the seventh. Together with it, the eighth, the facial and vestibulocochlear. Then you have ninth, glossopharyngeal, 10th, the vagus, and accessory, the 11th. And finally, here we have the 12th cranial nerve, which is the hypoglossal nerve. All the cranial nerves arise from the inferior surface of the brain, or the ventral aspect of the brain, except one of them, trochlear, which is the fourth cranial nerve. This arises from the dorsum, but again curves to become to the ventral surface of the brain. Now, we will not go to the details of the brain. You are not a medical student, you will be a dentist, but we will study the portion which forms from which arises the brainstem. All the last 10 cranial nerves arise from the brainstem. So we'll study only the brainstem. Now the brainstem, as I said, the brainstem, ساق الدماغ, the three parts, medulla oblongata and pons. These two are parts of the hindbrain and the midbrain. Collectively, they lie in one line, as you have seen. They lie in the middle. From here, midbrain. Then you have the pons and the medulla oblongata. These they are called brainstem because they connect to the spinal cord from below, and above connect to the forebrain, and from the dorsum they connect to the cerebellum. That's why these three portions are called brainstem. So formed of the medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain. So extends from the diencephalon to the foramen magnum, where it becomes continuous with the spinal cord, connects forebrain with hindbrain and spinal cord. From the brainstem emerge the last 10 cranial nerves from its ventral surface, except the trochlear, which is the fourth cranial nerve, emerge from the dorsal surface and curves again toward the ventral surface of the brainstem. So the brainstem formed of three parts, medulla oblongata and pons, which are from hindbrain, or the rhombencephalon, and the midbrain, which is the mesencephalon. These, they form a stem in the middle. They join forebrain with the hindbrain and with the spinal cord. From them emerge the last 10 cranial nerves, from the 3rd till the 12th cranial nerve, except the first and the second. They arise from the forebrain, but the last 10 arises from the ventral aspect of the brainstem, except the trochlear arises from the dorsal aspect and then curves to the ventral aspect. Now you'll study the medulla oblongata first. This is the medulla oblongata, the lower portion of the brainstem. The external features, if you see, look to the medulla oblongata. Here is another picture of the ventral surface of the brainstem. This is the midbrain, this is the pons, and this is the medulla oblongata. Now looking to the medulla oblongata, it's about 3 centimeters in length, and about 2 centimeters width. looking to its ventral surface. Now we are looking to the inferior surface of medulla oblongata. You'll see that it is divided into two halves, right and left, by this median fissure. In the lower part of it is interrupted by decussation of fibers passing from one side to the other. It's called decussation of pyramid. Now next to it, we have the another sulcus, which is ventrolateral sulcus. Here is ventrolateral groove or sulcus. And the sulcus separates it from the pons, which is the pontomedullary junction. Now in the upper part between the central median groove or sulcus and the lateral groove, we have this elevation, we call it pyramid. And lateral to this, there is another rounded elevation which looks like an olive, it's called olive. And lateral to the olive is, we pass to the dorsal surface, there is another sulcus, and we have the tuber cinerarium. Now from the ventral surface of medulla oblongata, from the ventral surface arises the last 7 cranial nerves. Here at the pontomedullary junction arises the abducens nerve, which is the 6th cranial nerve. Then lateral to the olive emerge the facial and the vestibulocochlear 7th and 8th cranial nerves. Below them in the groove, again lateral to the olive, emerge 9th, 10th, and cranial accessory. Glossopharyngeal, vagus, and cranial accessory 3 nerves. Between the olive and pyramid emerge the hypoglossal nerve, the last cranial nerve. So you have from 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, 7 cranial nerves emerge from the ventral aspect of medulla oblongata. Now passing to the pons, this is the ventral surface of pons, the other part, the pons. This is the ventral surface upon. There is again a pontine sulcus on the midline. On each side, you see that it's thrown into transverse ridges passing to the sides, and then become connected to the cerebellum. Here it's connected. This portion is called middle cerebellar peduncle. This is the pontine sulcus, and these are the transverse ridges passing on the ventral surface of the pons. Now, from the ventral surface of the pons emerge only 1 cranial nerve, which is the trigeminal nerve, the 5th cranial nerve, while the last 7 emerge from the ventral surface of medulla oblongata. Passing upward, the third part of the brainstem is the midbrain. On the ventral surface of the midbrain is this one. You will see these 2 bands of white matter, one on each side, passing to the forebrain. These 2 are called crus cerebri, 2 crura cerebri on each side. Between them is the area is thrown into these small pits containing these small foramina. This is called posterior perforated substance. Perforated, it means contains these openings. From the ventral surface of midbrain emerge the 3rd cranial nerve, which is the oculomotor nerve. So this is for the ventral surface of the brainstem. On the medulla, 2 to 3 centimeters. Length 2 centimeter width. We have the anterior median fissure. Lateral to it is the pyramid, anterolateral sulcus, where the hypoglossal nerve emerges. Then you have pyramidal decussation inferiorly and anterior external arcuate fibers. Posterolateral sulcus emerge the rootlets of 9th, 10th, and 11th cranial nerves. Then we come to the olive. Lateral to it between anterolateral and posterolateral sulci. And the 6th nerve emerge at the pyramidopontine sulcus, that is between the medulla and the pons. Rootlets of 7th and 8th cranial nerves emerge between olive and the pons. Then on the ventral surface of pons, convex transversely, contains a basilar or pontine sulcus. between medulla and midbrain, transverse ridges passing to be joined by middle cerebellar peduncle to cerebellum. Fifth cranial nerve rootlets arise from its lateral side. Then midbrain connects forebrain to pons and cerebellum, traverses hiatus and tentorium cerebelli, that is the portion of dura mater, is not more than 2 centimeters in length. The ventral surface, we see the two crural cerebra with the posterior perforated substance and rootlets of third cranial nerve, the oculomotor emerging from medial side of it. As I said, the fourth cranial nerve, the trochlear, curves from dorsal aspect to the ventral side. Now we come to the dorsal aspect. Here is the lateral view of the brainstem. This is the midbrain, the crus cerebri here you see. And then we have the pons with the fifth cranial nerve. Then we have the medulla oblongata showing the lateral portion of it with the olive and pyramid. The same, just looking to the side of the brainstem. This is the junction of pons with the cerebellum through middle cerebellar peduncle. Now, passing to the dorsal surface, this is the dorsal surface of the brainstem. Here you have the dorsal surface of the midbrain, then you have the dorsal surface of pons, and this is the dorsal surface of the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata here, this is the midbrain, sorry, the pons, and here is the midbrain. These four rounded masses form the dorsal surface of midbrain. Now the dorsal surface, looking to the medulla oblongata, you see dorsal surface in the lower half is closed, in the upper half it becomes opened. The lower half of it, again you have posterior median sulcus. Then you have lateral to it is an elevation on each side, we call it gracile tubercle. Lateral to this is cunate tubercle, which continues as a band into the spinal cord. We call it fasciculus or tractus gracilis and tractus cunatus. And lateral to it is the tuberculum cinereum. And then passing to the ventral aspect, you will have the olive and the pyramid. So from ventral, we have pyramid, olive, tuber cinereum, cunate tubercle, and gracile tubercle. Now the upper half of the medulla is opened and forms the floor of the fourth ventricle, the cavity of the hind brain. The floor, the lower half of the floor of the cavity of the hind brain, which is the fourth ventricle, which is filled with CSF and continues below here as the central canal inside the spinal cord. Passing to the dorsal surface of the pons, it's continuation again of the floor of the fourth ventricle, of the floor of the fourth ventricle. All this is floor, this rhomboid shaped area is called the rhomboid fossa, which is the floor of the fourth ventricle of the brain. We will study this later on, which is the cavity of the fourth ventricle. Now the dorsal surface of the midbrain contain these four rounded elevations. These we call them colliculi. Two of them are called superior colliculi and two of them are inferior colliculi. Between the two, at this level here below the inferior colliculus, emerge the fourth cranial nerve, the trochlear nerve. So dorsal surface of brainstem, medulla oblongata, caudal portion or distal half of it contains posterior median sulcus, fasciculus, cunatus, and gracilis. Then posterolateral sulcus. Superiorly these become rounded. We call them gracile and cunate tubercles. Then you have lateral to them tubercle cinereum. between rootlets of accessory and cuneate fascicle. Then the inferior cerebellar peduncle join it to the cerebellum. They form portions of the lateral walls of the fourth ventricle. We'll study these details where the openings are there of the fourth ventricle later on. The upper half of the medulla oblongata, as I said, is open and forms lower half of the floor of fourth ventricle. Pons dorsal surface forms the rostral part of fourth ventricle, part of the rhomboid fossa. Midbrain dorsal surface is the tectum of midbrain, formed of 4 colliculi, and then emerge from them tracts called brachia of colliculi, the rootlets of fourth cranial nerve with superior cerebellar peduncle joining it to the cerebellum. I'll stop here because I have at 3 o'clock. Again, I am sorry for this delay because I have a problem with the internet until they came do the service for it. الخط كان مقطوع قاطعت سيارة وعلى ما جت الشركة وصلحوا لي. I am sorry again. We will meet next week. We will see you at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much. I should go because I have the first year. Thank you.